Emily Carter thought she was escaping poverty for a dream job in London, but the moment billionaire CEO Richard Blackwell laid eyes on her, she was no longer a hire. She was a target. Emily Carter had known struggle for as long as she could remember, but nothing prepared her for the silent emptiness that followed the sudden death of her parents. It had happened just 6 months earlier in a rain-slicked car crash on a highway outside Houston. One moment they were on their way to visit a cousin. The next, she was standing alone at a funeral with no idea how to move forward. There were no siblings to lean on, no extended family offering help, just the cold reality of life pressing down harder than ever. The small rental apartment she lived in felt like a prison of memories, and every day was a silent fight not to break. She worked long hours at a roadside diner, wiping down counters and pouring coffee for people who didn't know her name, who never asked how she was doing. The tips were barely enough to pay rent, and her dreams of a better life slowly dissolved into daydreams she couldn't afford. Still, late at night, when the world quieted down and her body ached from double shifts, she would sit in front of her second-hand laptop and scroll through job listings. Most were scams or beyond her reach, requiring degrees or experience she didn't have. But she kept searching, because giving up meant dying slowly in a place that had already taken everything from her. One night, her tired eyes caught a listing that felt different. Personal assistant, international position, all expenses paid, UK-based. The company name sounded polished, Blackwell Private Holdings. The listing was vague, but oddly direct. It promised career growth, housing, and relocation support. Emily clicked the link, half expecting it to lead nowhere. But the application was simple, just a resume, a photo, and a paragraph about why she wanted the job. She had nothing to lose. Her fingers trembled as she typed, trying to sound confident and capable, hiding the truth of how broken she felt inside. She didn't think she'd hear back, yet, just 3 days later, her inbox lit up. You have been shortlisted. A formal offer is being prepared. Your flight details will follow shortly. For a moment, she stared at the screen, thinking it must be a joke. But then she saw the attached ticket. One way, Houston to London. The email was real. The job was real. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone, rereading the message again and again. A deep, confused feeling bloomed in her chest. Half hope, half fear. Why her? Why so fast? With only a week to prepare, Emily quit her job and packed the few things she owned into a suitcase that still had a broken zipper. She tried not to overthink it. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break she'd been praying for. As the plane lifted into the sky, she pressed her forehead to the window, watching the lights of Texas fade below. Her heart pounded, not just from fear but from the faint whisper that her life was about to change forever. She didn't know then that she was flying straight toward a truth darker than any nightmare she'd ever imagined. The moment Emily stepped out of Heathrow Airport, a gust of unfamiliar cold wrapped around her, as if London itself was warning her to turn back. Everything felt foreign. The scent in the air, the rushed footsteps of strangers, the gray clouds that blanketed the sky like a curtain hiding something ominous behind it. She clutched the thin coat she had brought from Texas, already regretting not bringing anything warmer. But more than the cold, it was the silence that unnerved her. The kind of silence that hummed underneath the city noise, like a secret no one dared to speak out loud. A man in a black suit and cap waited for her at arrivals with a placard that simply read, Miss Carter. He didn't smile, he barely spoke. Just opened the door to a black luxury car and drove in silence for nearly an hour. The streets shifted from busy highways to quiet, tree-lined avenues, until the car turned through massive wrought iron gates into a world that didn't feel real. The mansion, no, the estate, loomed ahead like something from a dream she was never meant to have. Glass windows shimmered in the dull sunlight, framed by stone walls and trimmed hedges that were too perfect to be natural. Emily's breath caught when she saw Richard Blackwell, for the first time. He stood at the entrance, hands tacked into his long coat, watching her like he already knew everything about her. There was something cold yet magnetic about him. Sharp cheekbones, silver at his temples, despite looking barely 40, and eyes so pale they almost looked colorless. He didn't smile, but his expression softened when she stepped out of the car, as if her presence had stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. He greeted her with a nod, his voice rich but quiet. "You must be Emily. We've been expecting you." Something about the way he said "we" sent a chill down her spine. She was shown not to an office, but to a guest room, more like a suite, with tall windows and silk curtains. Every detail screamed elegance, but she felt like a visitor in a museum where she didn't belong. The house staff were polite, efficient, but oddly distant. They moved like shadows, avoiding eye contact, never lingering in the same room for too long. She noticed strange things almost immediately: doors that were locked without explanation, halls that seemed soundproof, windows that didn't open. But she told herself not to be paranoid, not yet. Every morning, she received a typed itinerary with instructions for the day. But most of it involved staying indoors, organizing documents, or sitting in on calls she didn't understand. She kept expecting to be sent to the actual company office, to meet coworkers, to start working like a normal assistant. But the days passed, and she never left the estate. Richard appeared often, always sudden, always quiet. He watched her as if she were some kind of puzzle, and though he never crossed a line, there was something unsettling in his gaze. Like he wasn't just interested in her skills, but in her. She tried to ignore it, to believe she was overthinking. But the truth was whispering already, buried in the silence of locked rooms and unsaid words. Something wasn't right. And deep down, she was already afraid to find out what. The night it all began to unravel, Emily couldn't sleep. There was a heaviness in her chest that wouldn't go away. A tight, anxious pull like her instincts were screaming at her, trying to break through the polite, composed version of herself she had been forcing to survive here. The estate was silent, as it always was after dark. Too silent, no creaking floors, no distant voices, just that suffocating stillness, the kind that made every breath feel louder than it should. She stepped out of her room barefoot, careful not to let the old wooden floor betray her with its groans. She wasn't entirely sure why: curiosity, maybe, or just a desperate need to feel in control of something. A hallway light flickered as she passed, its dim glow casting long shadows that danced across the walls. She told herself she was being foolish, but her feet kept moving, like they knew something she didn't. The library door had always been locked. She'd tried it twice before out of innocent curiosity, only to find the handle unmoving. But tonight it gave way without resistance. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She stepped inside. The room was dark, but moonlight poured through the high-arched windows, revealing dust swirling in the air like old secrets. It wasn't the kind of library filled with well-loved books and the warm scent of old paper. It felt abandoned, cold, forgotten. But something had been disturbed: papers scattered on a desk, a drawer half open, a chair not fully pushed in. That's when she saw it. A small leather-bound diary, its edges worn and brittle, lay half-buried under a stack of business reports. She reached for it with trembling fingers, not even understanding why. The name written inside the cover stopped her cold. Claire Hudson. The name didn't mean anything at first, until she flipped through the pages and realized what she had found. Claire had once been an assistant, just like her. The entries started off simple: daily tasks, notes about adjusting to the estate, mentions of Richard's strange habits. But as the pages turned, her words changed. They grew sharp, desperate, fragmented. "He won't let me leave. Something is wrong with the staff. They avoid me. I heard screaming last night. I swear I did." And finally the last entry, scribbled so hard the pen nearly tore the page. "He knows I know. I'm next." Emily froze. The silence around her suddenly felt heavier, more threatening. She backed away, heart pounding, every instinct screaming now. She had to get out. She had to go. She rushed back to her room and turned on her laptop, determined to find something. Anything about Claire Hudson. a Google search, a missing persons alert, a staff record. But there was nothing, no LinkedIn profile, no social media, no articles, no digital footprint at all. It was as if Claire had never existed. Terror sank into her bones. What if this wasn't just coincidence? What if this job was a trap, and she was walking the same path? She checked her emails for her return flight, only to discover something even more chilling. Her booking had been cancelled. By someone else. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She lay awake, every creak of the house now laced with dread, knowing with a cold certainty that she was not safe. And someone, somewhere in that house, wanted her to stay that way. The shift in Richard's demeanor was so subtle, Emily might have missed it if she hadn't already been on edge. At first he simply lingered longer when he spoke to her. His eyes no longer just observed, they followed. She'd feel them at the back of her neck as she moved through the halls or sat quietly working on reports he no longer seemed interested in reading. Then came the gifts, an antique necklace placed on her dresser without explanation, a handwritten poem slipped into her books, a gown tailored to her exact size delivered without her ever being measured. It was all beautiful, expensive, and wrong. Each gesture made her feel like a possession wrapped in lace. The estate grew quieter, colder, and more suffocating by the day. Conversations with staff were brief, mechanical, like they were afraid of being seen speaking to her. One morning, she tried asking the housekeeper if anyone named Claire had worked there before. The woman's face went pale, and her lips pressed into a tight line before she simply walked away. No answer, no denial, just fear. At night, Emily stopped sleeping. She'd lie in bed, her heart beating fast, listening for footsteps in the halls. One night, around 2 a.m., she heard faint voices near the stairwell, low, tense, and hurried. She slipped out of bed and crept toward her door. Through the crack, she saw Richard standing in the corridor, whispering to his head of security. The words were quiet but sharp. "She's getting too curious, just like the others." Emily's blood turned to ice. She stepped back quickly, her breath caught in her throat. The weight of the diary in her drawer now felt like a curse she couldn't shake. She knew too much, and now they knew it too. That night, she faked illness during dinner. She needed time. She needed answers. While Richard dined alone in the study, Emily moved through the halls like a ghost, guided by fear and instinct. She remembered a door near the east wing, a small one, almost unnoticeable. It had always been locked, but tonight it led to a narrow staircase spiraling down into cold darkness. She followed it, her hand brushing the damp stone wall as she descended, the air turning metallic and sterile with every step. What she found at the bottom crushed her breath. It wasn't a wine cellar, it was a lab. Stainless steel counters, medical charts, storage units, filled with vials labeled only with numbers. Then there were the files, each folder marked with a woman's name: Claire, Julia, Amira, and now, Emily. Inside her file was a complete profile: blood type, medical history, psychological assessments she'd never agreed to. Photos taken without her knowledge, some in her room, some in the shower. Her legs gave way and she sank to the floor, hands shaking uncontrollably. All the politeness, the gifts, the silence, it was never affection. It was surveillance. It was control. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, a numbness settled in her chest as the horror crystallized. She was never hired. She was selected, like a lab rat in a golden cage, and now she had to survive it. Emily moved through the estate like a ghost now, silent, alert, pretending to be the same obedient girl they thought they had lured in. But every smile she gave was forced, every nod rehearsed. Her heart was no longer soft with fear. It had hardened into something sharper, something dangerous. The discovery in the basement had stripped away her innocence and left behind a single terrifying truth. Richard Blackwell was not just a manipulative employer. He was a predator in a tailored suit, operating something monstrous beneath the luxury and charm. She couldn't rely on the police, not without proof. And she couldn't run, not without a passport, or access to the outside world. Her only weapon was what she had found. She waited until the house was quiet again, then returned to the basement. With trembling hands she photographed everything, the files, the medical records, the coded spreadsheets. Her eyes blurred from the screen as she scrolled through folders with strange labels: Phase 1, Trial B3, Donor Index. Each entry was colder than the last. Women like her, recruited with false hope, were drugged, studied, and erased. Their names didn't vanish, they were deleted. But the most horrifying discovery came when she accessed Richard's hidden folder. There, buried under layers of encryption, she managed to bypass using a password from Claire's diary, were dozens of emails. They weren't addressed to employees. They were sent to clients, wealthy buyers in the US, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. The files weren't just medical. They were part of a trafficking network, camouflaged as experimental fertility research. Women were labeled as assets, and their bodies, organs, eggs, even pregnancies were sold under sterile, clinical language. It wasn't just cruelty, it was commerce. Emily's breath hitched in her throat. Her hands were sweating as she compressed the files and uploaded them to a burner cloud account. She didn't know who to trust, but she remembered a name: Daniel Fraser, a journalist from New York who had once uncovered a biotech scandal involving illegal drug testing in Africa. She sent the files to his encrypted tip line with a short message: "They're still doing it. I'm inside. Please hurry." The reply came faster than she expected. One sentence that sent a shock of hope through her body. "I believe you. Help is coming." But time was a luxury she didn't have. The next morning, Richard appeared at breakfast with a strange smile. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. She felt it then, that he knew. Or at least, he suspected. The walls seemed to inch closer that day, the security team more watchful, the staff quieter. Her room was searched while she was out. Her laptop disappeared for 3 hours and returned with its battery strangely warm. She knew what that meant. They were closing in. By sunset, the manor gates were locked. A black SUV waited at the front, its engine idling. Her passport had vanished from the drawer, and her name had been scrubbed from the online visa system. As far as the world was concerned, Emily Carter had never entered the UK. She stood at her window, staring out at the thick woods beyond the gates, and knew the truth. She wasn't just trapped. She was being erased. The final 3 days felt like a lifetime trapped in slow motion. Emily lived in constant terror, knowing every step, every breath could be her last. If she slipped up, she barely slept. She barely ate. Her instincts screamed with every passing hour that her time was running out. The staff no longer met her gaze, and even the soft-spoken butler who once offered her tea now avoided her entirely. The kindness had vanished, replaced with silence that felt like a countdown. Her heart pounded relentlessly as she moved through the estate, rehearsing 1,000 escape plans that all ended with locked gates or blank stairs. Every doorknob, every creaking floorboard, felt like a trap. The walls themselves seemed to watch her now. She could feel it. Richard was preparing for something. She didn't know if he was waiting for the right moment or savoring her fear, but she knew he wouldn't let her walk out alive. Then it happened, just after sunrise. The distant wail of sirens pierced the cold air, growing louder, sharper, more real with every second. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then from her window, she saw them, dozens of marked cars racing up the winding road, headlights flashing like salvation. She backed away in disbelief, tears springing to her eyes as the gates shattered open, under police force and armed agents poured through. She tried to move, but her legs buckled beneath her. Her body, too overwhelmed to process hope after days of terror, shut down. Within minutes, the estate exploded into chaos, shouts, orders, doors breaking open. She heard Richard screaming in fury downstairs, demanding to know who betrayed him, but his power was gone. just like the carefully polished mask he wore. They found her in a locked guest house behind the West Wing, drugged, dazed, barely able to speak. Someone had injected her with a paralytic compound just hours earlier. She had been moments away from disappearing forever. But her message had reached the right hands. Daniel Fraser had forwarded her files to the FBI, Interpol, and 2 major news outlets, and once the evidence surfaced, they moved fast. Richard was caught trying to board his private jet, calm, arrogant, cuffed in silence. His lawyer stood beside him, but his usual expression of control had cracked into something hollow and empty. As agents listed charges ranging from medical crimes to international trafficking, he said nothing, not a single word, like he knew the game was over. Emily was taken to a secure hospital, her body detoxing from days of psychological and chemical warfare. She didn't speak much at first. The trauma lived in her eyes, not her voice, but as investigators and journalists came, her story poured out. Bit by bit, piece by piece, she helped them unravel the full scale of what Richard had done, not just to her but to 17 other women, some of whom were never found. The trial made international headlines. Politicians condemned the network, protests erupted, but none of that mattered to Emily. All she wanted was silence that didn't feel dangerous, and safety that didn't come with a price. She never returned to Texas. She never gave interviews on camera, but every time a new victim's name was cleared, or a trafficker was arrested using the evidence she helped provide, a small piece of her began to heal. Emily had lost everything, but in facing evil she became the reason it fell.